In the recent chapter 247, Jinpachi Ego proclaims that a footballer's originality is a reflection of their hunger. This scene immediately jumped out to me. After all, this scene taps into what is perhaps the most sustained metaphor in the entire series. In the raging inferno that is Blue Lock, egoism emerges as an all-consuming hunger, transforming strikers into ravenous beasts that devour each other to satisfy their insatiable craving for goals. So, in this video, I will showcase just how prominently Blue Lock features imagery of feeding and hunger, and explore the implications of this for Blue Lock's philosophy of egoism. Hello, my name is Sean, and for a vegetarian, I've sure spent an ungodly amount of time on this channel talking about meat. When the Blue Lock candidates enter the first selection, they are thrust into a battle for survival. One where they are to rebuild their understanding of football from zero. And what's really striking about the first chapters is how heavily they feature an undercurrent of primitivism. Our cast is forced into a chaotic state of nature where survival of the fittest reigns supreme. According to Jinpachi Ego, building up a team of 11 strikers serves to imitate the earliest stages of the sport. By implication, this is a football from before the dawn of civilization, devoid of any culturally acquired tactics and conventions. But more than that, the bait that Ego dangles most prominently before his fledgling superstars is a promise of luxurious foods. In the Blue Lock program, strikers have to climb up in the pecking order just to fill their stomach. And although it's played for laughs, I think it's highly significant that some of the candidates start scavenging or eating with their hands as soon as they set foot in Blue Lock. Once these ordinary teenagers are secluded from the outside world, they are reduced to the state of animals, content with satisfying their base desires, such as being rewarded for scoring goals with a slab of succulent meat. Now, there's good reason why Blue Lock is doing all it can to bring out its characters' inner cavemen. After all, the belief that the world's greatest striker must also be the greatest egoist is a direct rejection of Japan's alleged social norms. So, if the Blue Lock candidates need to unlearn all of their cultural assumptions, Ego's program must undo the very foundations of civilization. And to do so, he sets out to replace all of their learned behaviors with primal instincts. Most prominently, the lesson that they must feed or starve. To this end, the player's position in the rankings is directly connected with increasingly desirable meals. And Ego even torments his famished strikers by making them watch him feast from across the screen. So, from its earliest stages, Blue Lock establishes a connection between egoism and hunger. The most egotistical strikers are those most willing to fight for their meals. In fact, the notion that egoism is a form of hunger can be traced back all the way to chapter 1. After all, the pivotal revelation that egoism is the secret to winning the World Cup is presented with a close-up of Jinpachi Ego's mouth. We're also shown the flip side of this symbolism in the latter part of the first selection. At this stage, Seishiro Nagi is a prodigy who lacks all motivation to play football. He's got no ego to speak of. And this is underscored by a striking detail in his initial introduction. Nagi can't even be bothered to chew his food. In other words, he completely lacks the hunger that characterizes a proper egoist. Yet, all this talk about hunger becomes even more explicit in the second selection. But before this selection commences, Ego subjects the Blue Lock players to grueling strength training, where they're forbidden to even touch a ball. Also, their training is so exhausting that they can't even stomach their food. With that, they're starved in both a figurative and a literal sense. Their bodies are deprived of nutrients, while mentally they crave to play football again. Ego says so much himself. All this suffering serves to nurture an insatiable hunger for goals. In his view, this level of hunger can only come about in the most dire conditions. And that's what he's trying to achieve through the relentless psychological torment that is the Blue Lock program. Here, Ego most explicitly casts egoism as a form of hunger. A hunger that can change the entire world. So now, it's time to talk about devouring. At this point in the story, I feel that devouring someone has become a bit of a dead metaphor. And by that, I mean something that is factually figurative, but has been so commonly used that we don't even think of its metaphorical significance anymore. So let me try to reactivate devouring as a functional metaphor, in light of all the stuff I've previously discussed. On a structural level, the second selection is all about testing the Blue Lock candidate's individual abilities. And so, the watershed moment for Isagi is his face-off against Naruhaya. This is where Isagi has to prove that he can hold his own among the prodigies. And in what is perhaps Isagi's greatest challenge so far, he showcases that he has what it takes to survive. He faces a similar life or death experience to that of a player like Noah, and that brings out a hunger to devour another player for the first time. Yet, I think the most iconic instance of devouring someone in the series comes in the next match, in the 3v3 where Isagi and Baro both devour each other. After all, this is the match that introduces the idea that true egoism is manifested by teammates constantly devouring each other. So let me explore in a bit more detail how a match revolving around Isagi and Baro devouring each other feeds into, and that pun is very much intended, Blue Lock's overarching philosophy of egoism. To start with Isagi, while the first selection certainly challenges a lot of conventions about football, Team Z on a fundamental level still survived by coming together as a team. But now that Isagi has paired up with Baro, the dynamic has fundamentally shifted. In many ways, Baro is the purest egoist we've met so far. He's a guy who refuses to pass because he insists on scoring every goal himself, and categorically rejects playing as part of a team. So faced with this impenetrable wall, Isagi realizes that he has to revise his entire approach. Instead of trying to get along with Baro, he has to devour his teammates. This is the moment where Isagi is finally weaned off of his preconceived notions about teamwork, the ones that Jinpachi Ego disparages as the cause of Japan's weakness at the start of the manga. and in their place, Isagi subscribes to a new paradigm of how to coexist with his teammates. One that doesn't reflect the values of his culture, but rather wells forth from a newfound primal hunger. So now let's zoom in on Baro. After he's devoured by Isagi, we witness him spiraling out of control from an ever-increasing desperation to score goals. As Isagi manipulates his teammates, Baro starts frantically craving a pass. Note how here too, Blue Lock invokes the semantic field of hunger. The suggestion here is that Isagi's new playstyle is driving Baro to the brink of starvation. And as the match goes on, Baro is reduced further and further to the level of a beast, obeying only his animalistic impulses. At long last, he finally abandons all sense of reason and gives in to his cannibalistic hunger. A hunger to awaken, to feed, to devour. That's the kind of hunger that Blue Lock aims to instill in its greatest egoists. Now, there's something that really struck me upon rereading this part of the story. After the match concludes, we're shown scenes of both Ego and Baro feasting. And let's be real, there could be no better payoff for the match that most clearly equates egoism to hunger. The scene with Baro in particular blends the figurative and the literal dimensions of devouring. Baro proclaims that he will soon devour Isagi's talents and grow to hitherto unforeseen heights. All the while, he is consuming the physical spoils of his hunt. After all, Blue Lock offers stakes as rewards for scoring goals. With this scene, the manga showcases that egoist strikers are not political animals. They are ravenous carnivores that inhabit a dog-eat-dog world. And now that Baro's bestial urges have awakened, the metaphor of devouring is brought to even greater extremes. In the next match, Baro is compared to a fasting lion, all for the express purpose of filling his stomach with a goal. In other words, the new playstyle of Blue Lock's most archetypical egoist now revolves around his all-consuming hunger. And this concept of hunger continues to rear its head as the manga progresses. One of the most striking aspects in this light is how mouth imagery starts bubbling to the surface. I'll keep this brief because I don't want to regurgitate parts of my Ubers analysis here, but mouths serve as the main visual metaphor of the Ubers. From Lorenzo's signature mouth tattoo to the monstrous mouth as personification of the hyper-coordinated Uber system. All of this, of course, springs forth from Lorenzo's backstory. He's the one character in Blue Lock who has actually stared starvation in the face. But then, Snuffy reached out a helping hand. And as the ultimate symbol of Snuffy's brand of leadership, this golden goose replaced Lorenzo's rotten teeth. Now let's dissect the metaphorical significance of this scene a bit further. The young Lorenzo hitting rock bottom is illustrated by his teeth having fallen out. Now, as we've discussed, Blue Lock represents egoism as a kind of hunger. So in other words, Lorenzo's lack of teeth, and thereby his inability to consume food, symbolizes him losing the desire to live on. That's also why Lorenzo tells of his past while chomping down on a bucket of popcorn. His new pair of teeth reignited his will to keep living, in the form of a newfound hunger. And as a result, Lorenzo has become someone who never bites the hand that feeds him. And just as an aside here, I swear, now that I've started paying attention to this, Blue Lock seems almost compulsively obsessed with showing its characters eating. Anyways, all this is subtly building up to the Uber's second goal. This is the moment where Barrow devours the entire playing field. And that idea is reinforced by Barrow usurping the Uber's signature mouth. At this moment, Barrow emerges as the personification of egoistic hunger, a force of nature that consumes all in its path. But there is one other character who is also associated with mouths. During his awakening in the U20 match, Rin Itoshi becomes the embodiment of hideous destruction. And that idea is brought out most powerfully by this panel of Rin surrounded by a cloud of mouths. What's remarkable, however, is that Rin descends into madness because he saw his teammates devouring his football, and that fills him with a sense of sheer disgust. Now, many of Blue Lock's top strikers seem to represent particular aspects of egoism. We've seen Barrow as the epitome of hunger, and Rin, the greatest player to come out of Blue Lock, serves as the personification of destruction. Unfortunately, I don't quite have time to substantiate this claim here, but I promise that I'll properly delve into this in a future video. In any case, this means that when Rin's ego, that is to say his hunger, reaches a breaking point, he devours others by brutally destroying them. He absorbs elements of his opponent's playstyle, not to improve in the long term, but to humiliate his victims and prove his supremacy. So, when Rin's state of mind is visualized with this cloud of mouths behind him, it symbolizes his desire to indiscriminately devour each and every one in his path. Blue Lock's number one is also the one with a different kind of urge to devour and to consume. This mouth imagery is capped off when Isagi approaches Rin in the aftermath of the U20 match. Here, Rin finally acknowledges Isagi as his rival and declares that he'll be coming for Isagi next. And this blood-curdling threat is underpinned with a swarm of demonic mouths gushing forth from the humiliated striker. The message is loud and clear. Rin is itching to violently devour the one who upstaged him. And by the way, I want to shout out Ciorix for creating this awesome thumbnail for me, for doing this custom artwork. He's an absolutely fantastic Blue Lock colorist, and you should really all go check him out and support him. Now here's where I want to circle back to chapter 247, which jump-started this entire video. Here, Ego reaffirms that one's hunger is the factor that will determine their survival, just as he did all the way back in chapter 39. To me, it seems highly relevant that the manga felt the need to reiterate this right before the PXG match. The match where Rin is set up to enact his revenge on Isagi. Now, I don't really know in what direction this is all headed, but I strongly suspect that the relevance of mouth symbolism for Rin's character is about to become fleshed out even more. Now, one final thing before I let you go. In chapter 241, we get this scene where Isagi inspires Igarashi to develop his own ego, and the monk realizes what he needs to progress from here. And right after that, they reminisce about their earliest days in Blue Lock, back when they were stuck eating the lowliest foods in the building. Back in the first selection, the Blue Lock candidates had yet to develop a proper hunger. It was a time where they could still make do with such paltry foods. But with all we've discussed to this point, I think it's clear that this callback serves a greater purpose. Blue Lock brings up this memory in order to juxtapose it with Igarashi awakening his inner ego. In other words, he too now hungers for greater things, and has thereby finally graduated from pickled radish and fermented soybeans. So that's it from my end, but please do send me some further food for thought. And if you liked what you just saw, consider subscribing for more in-depth Blue Lock analysis every other week. Also, I know I mentioned previously that I'm working on a somewhat bigger project. To be honest, that video has been consuming way more time than I'd anticipated, and I don't want to completely starve you of content. So I decided to focus on this video first just to get something out there. But I'm hoping to wrap up this new video, this new project in 2 weeks, and I'll keep you posted if not. So anyways, I'm hoping to see you guys again soon.